2. Yep, that's good. Yep, there we go. We're live. Woo. Sorry, folks, my janky setup here took a little bit longer than usual to get going. Okay, let's wait for some people to show up. Do do do. Let's get into it. Since I already started late. Won't wait too long here to get going. Let's roll. Today we're going to talk about the leaving and the vision. We're going to finish off our section on lies and memory, and then we will resume our discussions when we come back by talking about one of my favorite sections, the user interface and the user experience, where we're going to talk about all the different fun graphical dark patterns and tricks that we use to deceive our end users, or not, depending on whether you think that's cool. All right, let's go on to believing the vision. So, we're going to talk a little bit about Eastern philosophy today because we've looked at Western philosophy and Western philosophers a lot, and it's only fair to include the East a little bit too. Now, the main difference, I would say, between the East and the West is what they pursue. And you will obviously get a lot of different answers if you ask different people about what are the main differences between Eastern and Western philosophy. And also, that's a really broad category because in the West we have lots of different schools of thought, and in the East we have actually even more separate and uh, both geographically and intellectually different schools of thought. We have Confucianism, we have Buddhism, we have Taoism, we have Hinduism. One of the main differences, if you've noted just from those descriptions there, is that those are all religions too. In the East, philosophy was tied very closely to religion and still is. In the West, philosophy started tied very close to religion, but even from the get-go, it wasn't that closely intertwined with religion, because if we think about our philosophical origins in the West, we mostly trace them back to Greece, and well, the Greeks were polytheistic, and their religion had a lot of mysticism, which the philosophy that they discuss has very little to do with. If anything, a lot of the mysticism and stuff that they include is just kind of symbolic. They're showing you different stories and things that tell the tales that they're trying to tell, or at least we can think of them that way today. But in the East, religion is deeply entwined to this day with philosophy, and at the same time, there's a lot less of that really complex mystical stuff that we have in Western religion. Eastern religions are much calmer on that front. So Western philosophers to this day, and especially in the modern age, relentlessly pursue the truth, and that's why philosophy has become very ingrained with science, and that's why we see a lot of philosophical discussion in realms like software. Philosophers are trying to figure out what is true about the world. Eastern philosophy is much more concerned with liberating people. Liberating people from what, you might ask? Well, the main concern of most of the Eastern philosophies is to liberate people from suffering. If you think of the four truths of Buddhism, for example, the first one is that life is suffering, and then the other three are an extension of that truth, the fourth one being you can get rid of your suffering by following the Eightfold Path. But life is suffering is the starting point to almost all schools of Eastern thought, and the need to know the truth is just one of many ways that the world makes you suffer, and the inability to grasp the truth ever truly is just another way that the world makes you suffer. Because the truth, and this is probably true even if you're more in the Western school, the truth is infinite. It is impossible to reach it, right? If I say something like the sky is blue, that's true, but there's more truth inside of that. Well, the sky isn't actually blue. There's Rayleigh waves scattering in the atmosphere, and sometimes it's blue, and sometimes it's white, and sometimes it's red, and sometimes it's purple, and sometimes it's black. And really, it's not blue at all. It's just that we have these cones in our eyes that are more attuned to blue light than violet light, and so on and so forth. There are so many caveats and so many layers to the truth that the sky is blue that we can keep pursuing forever. We can never really reach the Taoists would call the inner truth of what color the sky is. That statement is just, even though it's simple, completely out of our reach. Okay, let's go on to some more examples. Let's go on to the fastest 5G network in America, something we talked about in our discussion last time. One of those claims that we know is a lie because everybody claims that they have it. So AT&T has the fastest 5G network in America. Verizon has the fastest 5G network in America. T-Mobile has it. They all say they have it. A Western perspective, most schools of Western philosophical thought would say that somebody is probably lying. Somebody is not telling the whole truth by our Western definitions, where the truth is something that is provable, or the truth is something that can be put into exercise. Constructivist or postmodernist schools, they might be more happy with the paradox of multiple different entities making the same claim, but most of the other schools of thought are probably going to be kind of unhappy with that fact. But an Eastern philosophy would say, well, actually, they're all probably a little bit true. You probably know the concept of the yin and the yang, the little white and black thing with the little white and black dot inside of it. Well, you can think of truth by that concept too. Maybe something is mostly false with a little dot of truth inside of it. Maybe it's mostly true with a little dot of falsehood inside of it. But either way, there's a little bit of truth in all their statements. There's probably some 3 by 3 square somewhere in the cornfields of Ohio where Sprint actually has the best service. So maybe even it's true for all of them. And maybe there's a little bit of truth in everything. Even if somebody tells something that's completely a lie, a total falsehood, you can still extract information from it. You can gain knowledge from things that are completely false. So you actually don't need a statement to be completely true to learn truth from it. And to that extent, everything is a little bit true. So if somebody tells you, I'm the king of England, that's a lie, but now you know something about them. You know that they're nuts, or you know that they're a narcissistic asshole, but you've learned something, even though they've lied to you completely. So maybe it doesn't actually matter what they say. That's the letting go bit, the liberation. Maybe the truth is that it doesn't matter if T-Mobile and AT&T claim that they have the fastest 5G network in America. And actually, this is what I heard when a lot of you were arguing it last time. You've become accustomed to the fact that they're all going to lie. You don't care what it is that software companies and other companies tell you because you know that it's probably not true. And therefore, it doesn't matter because we all just assume that it may or may not be true. We don't really care. And in that case, it really doesn't matter what they claimed because nobody's really listening. All right, well, an interesting way of thinking of it. So let's look at some quotes from probably the most famous book. Well, let's not say the most famous book in Eastern philosophy, but one of them. You've got your Art of War, you've got the Tao, you've got the Confucius dialects, but the Tao's a big one. Tao, Tao, however you want to pronounce it. Just keep on using that stream of mispronouncing philosophers. All right, so a couple quotes from there, obviously translated into English rather poorly. This book is really complicated to translate because it uses some very complicated expressions and also because it's like 2,000 years old and it took a long time for anybody to translate it into English. But hey, anyway, stop thinking and your problems. That's a kind of a common expression in the West, actually, isn't it? We have that expression in lots of different forms. We tell people to just relax and stop thinking about it. So it's not like we don't have this concept. The more you know, the less you understand. We kind of express this differently. There are other books of Eastern philosophy that say it in a more Western way, but we say the more you learn, the more you know that you don't know. So the more knowledge you acquire, the more you realize that you know nothing. So the more you learn, the more you realize that you are ignorant. Okay. There's nothing in the world more soft and weak than water, and yet for attacking things that are firm and strong, there is nothing that can take precedence of it. This is a interesting quote because it doesn't sound like it's about the truth. It sounds like mumbo jumbo about water. But remember what Nietzsche said again about the truth being this not particularly concrete thing. There's a lot of symbolism in Eastern philosophy that compares truth to things like water and sand, where the more you grasp them, the more they slip out of your fingers, the more you try to pick it up, the more it does the same, and you can never really get an awful lot of it in your grasp because, well, it's flowing all the time. And well, this is the same thing. It's symbolism for the truth being like water because it's, well, difficult to grasp. And if somebody thinks that their knowledge is firm and strong, probably wrong. And another interesting one that comes back to philosophers like Hegel, who are really obsessed with paradox. Words that are strictly true seem to be paradoxical. That one is a little bit interesting, isn't it? It means that if we came up with an actual truth, something that was strictly true, then it would actually sound paradoxical. Okay. The West has a similar tradition. The West has Stoicism, founded by a philosopher whose name is easy to mispronounce because it's written as Zeno, which should be pronounced something like Seno or something. So, founded by Xeno, incidentally, after Confucianism, which comes about 200 years earlier, but before Taoism, which comes about 400 years after, and before Buddhism, which comes quite a bit after, almost 1,000 years after. Freedom isn't secured by filling up your heart's desires, but by removing your desires. Stoicism's made a big comeback in the modern age. It's pretty popular among software developers too. I've met quite a few people who entertain Stoic ideas in software development. It's a good philosophy for people who have been beaten down by the world one way or another. It's a philosophy of enduring the stuff that happens to you and learning to deal with it. The most fundamental beliefs of Stoics are to behave like nature. When a tornado strikes and destroys the forest or something, nature doesn't get mad about it, it just starts growing back. And well, if you just don't get mad and continue to live your life and continue to grow and all that stuff, well, there you go. But critics would say, hey, you're neglecting your emotional side, you're neglecting your human side. The feelings and desires are what make you a person. Well, okay, both valid points. But Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, they're all very similar. They all practice the same concept of freeing yourself from your desires, freeing yourself from your wants, and freeing yourself from the truth to an extent as well. All right. Letting go of the truth then. If you do let go of the truth, if you don't care about whether or not something's true or not, if you're willing to, at a certain point, say, I don't need to know, okay, does that mean that you're obligated to tell the truth to others? Do you still have to tell people the truth if you don't care if something is true or not? If you've decided, I don't care whether or not the sky is blue. I'm happy not knowing the full truth or whatever you want to call it. Is that an excuse for you to go around telling people that the sky is purple? Well, maybe not. Okay. Do you need to prove that you're telling the truth? This is one where Eastern philosophy has a pretty concrete statement. They would say no. The arguing, the constantly trying to prove yourself right, that's self-defeating and pointless. And even the schools of Eastern thought, even the masters, pride themselves on not teaching anybody anything. All of the great masters in Eastern thought, people like the Buddha, people come to them to learn by observing them. These guys do not teach people lessons. They don't go found schools. They're not like Socrates, where they have a bunch of students and they teach them stuff. No, they actually teach by example and not by showing people stuff. And an interesting thing about almost all the Eastern works is that they pretty much never argue. When they say their things about philosophy, they just say the thing. and then that's it. They don't back it up. They don't say why they believe the thing. They just make a statement about something that they believe is true, and then they just drop the mic and walk away. Compare that to Western philosophy, where every philosopher has to write a gajillion pages uh, backing up what they believe in and proving that it's true. Well, in Eastern school, they don't really do that. The argument, the conflict and stuff, that's really a Western thing. Remember what Nietzsche said on truth again. He said that the truth isn't necessarily the substantial thing that's meant to be argued. Well, it's no coincidence that Nietzsche was very strongly influenced by Buddhism. It's probably one of the biggest influences on his thinking that there was. The constant need to argue, though, obviously he did not let go of that. So then let's talk a little bit about believing the company Kool-Aid, how this relates to our oppressive need to tell the truth, or maybe not oppressive need, maybe obligatory and very moral need if you come from a more Western way of thinking. Here's a quote from a book that I'm using to build some of the later lessons, a book that I highly suggest. It's Dataclasm, and it was written by one of the founders of OkCupid. And in the introduction, he admits, I've never been on an online date in my life, and neither have any of the other founders. And if it's not for you, believe me, I get that. Interesting, right? Let me actually read the rest of it. I have it pulled up in my book here, but not written down. Tech evangelism is one of my least favorite things, and I'm not here to trade my blinking digital beads for anyone's precious island. I still subscribe to magazines. I get the Times on the weekend. Tweeting embarrasses me. I can't convince you to use, respect, or believe in the internet or social media any more than you already do or don't. By all means, keep right on thinking what you've been thinking about the online universe. This is a really common belief in tech. Nobody hates the internet more than IT people. You'll find that people who do professional networking infrastructure and stuff at work absolutely refuse to install smart bulbs in their home, prefer old school switches, and buy cars from the 80s because they're afraid of all the computers in their automobile. It's not unusual. So, to what extent do you actually have to believe in what you do in order to do it well? Do you need to believe in your product in order to sell it? Whatever piece of software that you're selling, do you need to believe that it works? Do you need to believe that it benefits people and in the messaging that your company gives out about how it benefits people? Okay, well, let's say you don't necessarily. Do you even need to understand how it works in theory? How it benefits people? What it does? Who it's for? How much do you actually need to know about what you sell? How responsible are you for that information? Because at the end of the day, we're finishing off lies and omissions by talking about the lies and omissions that we tell ourselves. If you don't know what you're building, you can easily absolve yourself of responsibility for it. At the same time, you might not even really be able to find out what you're building. Are you allowed to omit things from your own understanding on purpose? Can we go and say, well, I don't actually care who uses our software. I don't care if it's some preschool in Nebraska or if it's some dictator in Iran. I don't care if it's used to mark buildings that need to be repainted or paint targets for missiles. Not my problem. Okay, well, if you're omitting information from yourself on purpose, what about on accident? Or just from laziness, just because you have a lot of shit to do throughout the day and you just can't really be ours to learn about everything that your product is ultimately used for. Here are the three sides we're going to take today. If you're on the moral side, you think that it is your obligation to learn everything that you can about what you do and what happens with what you do within reason. And then to be honest about it with yourself and probably with others too. But for today, we're mostly talking about being honest with yourself. If that touches onto how you talk about it with other people, by all means. But if you're on the immoral side, you think that outside of the specific technical task that you do, and then whatever information that you need in order to do it well, everything else about what you make is not your problem. It doesn't matter, and you don't necessarily need to learn it. And if you do learn it, well, that's also not your problem. You don't have to worry about it, and you can just sort of forget about it if it's not something that's agreeable to you. If you're on the amoral side, then you think it depends. There are certain things that you should learn within reason. Now, if you're in the amoral side, I have to ask, how do you know what you're supposed to know? How do you know if a piece of information is very important to you or not important at all? And I guess before we finish off, let's read a couple of great quotes from the Eastern philosophy books. We'll start with the Tao. Let's start with the Tao. Let's start with the Tao on forgetting knowledge. He who devotes himself, these are not pictured, by the way, I'm just reading these. He who devotes himself to learning seeks from day to day to increase his knowledge. He who devotes himself to the Tao seeks from day to day to diminish his knowledge. Also, it could be translated to his doing. So, if you're committed to the Tao, you seek to know less and less every day. It sounds an awful lot like forgetting. He diminishes it again and again till he arrives at doing nothing on purpose. Having arrived at this point of non action, there is nothing which he does not do. Interesting, isn't it? Let's go on to the next one. The master said, this is from Confucian Analects, actually, moving on from the Tao. The master said, they who know the truth are not equal to those who love it, and they who love it are not equal to those who delight in it. So the people who know the truth are not the people who necessarily seek it out. The people who know the truth are not even necessarily the people who like it. The master said, the wise find pleasure in water, the virtuous find pleasure in hills. The wise are active, the virtuous are tranquil, the wise are joyful, the virtuous are long lived. Wisdom and water again. Common Eastern thing. Knowledge is water. A lot of reasons why knowledge is water, but that's a fun one. There were four things which the master taught: letters, ethics, devotion of soul, and truthfulness. So that comes from Confucianism again. Four things the master taught. So that means there are four things that were important to Confucianism. Letters, okay, so you need to know how to read. Ethics, cool, philosophy. Devotion of soul, faith. And truthfulness. Ooh, that's a fun one. Last one from Confucianism. The master said, learn as if you could not reach your object, and were always fearing also lest you lose it. So, about learning in general, learn as if you will never fully grasp the truth of what it is that you're trying to figure out. Here's one from the works of Mencius. When the superior men of old had errors, they reformed them. The superior men of the present time, when they have errors, persist in them. The errors of the superior men of old were like eclipses of the sun and moon. All the people witnessed them, and when they had reformed them, all the people looked up to them with their former admiration. But do the superior men of the present day only persist in their errors? They go on to apologize for them. Likewise, this is an interesting one because it's almost 2,000 years old, and it's complaining that people used to take responsibility for their actions and tell the truth after the fact when they had realized that they had made a mistake. And now people don't do that, and for that, Mencius disparages them. An interesting thing to note in an era where just going backsies or making an apology is, well, the norm. And exposing the fact that you had once been wrong, like the eclipse described in the quote, well, that's pretty darn rare, isn't it? All right, last one from Mencius. Let's see if I can find this thing. Okay, how some are great men, lords of reason, and some are little men, slaves of sense. An interesting dichotomy, by the way, because in the West we have rationalism and empiricism, schools of thought that say that you have to trust your mind versus your senses. The Mencius folks here obviously believe in the mind side of it, but okay. Going on. All are equally men, but some follow the part of themselves which is great, and some follow the part which is little. How is this? Mencius answered, the senses of hearing and seeing do not think and are obscured by external things. When one thing comes into contact with another, as a master of course, it leads it away. To the mind belongs the office of thinking. By thinking, it gets the right view of things. By neglecting to think, it fails to do this. These, the senses of the mind, are what heaven has given us. Let a man first stand fast in the supremacy of the nobler part of his constitution, and the inferior part will not be able to take it from him. It is simply this which makes the great man. So, mind over sense. Senses suck. Mind, awesome. Think about that as we go into our discussion, too. All right, so pick your side. I'll see you in Discord, and remember, you either believe that you need to learn everything about what you do within reason and to be honest about it with yourself, or you don't, you think that outside of your particular technical task, it is very much not your problem. As soon as I can figure out how to turn off my stream, I'll see you.